Hello everybody, it's the Fantasy Football Almanac, back at it with another type of football video. Today we're doing our wide receivers 11 through 20 here. We did 1 through 10 a couple of days ago. You can go find that. I'll put a link to it right now somewhere up here. I don't know where exactly it goes, but to one of these two places, I think right here. So if you want to watch that first and then come back to this video, so that way you can get a little more context about these wide receivers, that would be awesome. But we'll also have all of our tiers somewhere over here for this ranking video today. But before we get into it, please, if you do enjoy these type of videos, go down, leave a like, leave a comment, let me know your top 20 wide receivers. I'd love to hear it. I'm responding to any comment, any questions you guys have related to fantasy football. I will gladly answer down there as well. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss another one of these fantasy videos and you can destroy your league mates. With that out of the way, let's hop into it. Let's get into number 1. So the first wide receiver I'm going to be talking about today is my wide receiver 11 on my rankings. He is a tier drop off from my first 10 wide receivers. But he's an absolutely phenomenal player. I have no idea why he's going this low. He's coming off the board right now at an ADP of 58, wide receiver 23 on Sleeper, and on Underdog he's coming off at 42.2 or the wide receiver 20. This is Marquise Hollywood Brown here. Marquise Hollywood Brown, I know I probably got him a little high. I mean, I'm 10 spots over him on consensus on Underdog and 12 on Sleeper. So, I mean, I do have him pretty high. So let me get into why. Let me get into why I like Marquise Hollywood Brown so much. For one, this guy's got legitimate 4.2 speed. I mean, this guy's an absolute burner type material, can win you weeks with his speed. Guy's an absolutely phenomenal speedster. But not only that, he's in a scheme that fits this speed to an absolute T. He's going from one of the most run-happy offenses in the entire league to one of the most pass-happy offenses, the air raid offense with Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray. Not to mention, Kyler Murray was Marquise Hollywood Brown's teammate in college. Kyler Murray specifically requested to go out there and get Marquise Hollywood Brown, so they traded a first-round pick to go out and get him. They wanted Marquise Hollywood Brown. Kyler wanted Marquise Hollywood Brown, specifically for this scheme fit. The scheme fit is absolutely insane. I mean, it's a beautiful scheme fit for him. Last season, in this run-first offense that I'm describing, he had 145 targets for 91 receptions and over 1,000 yards. In a run-first offense, he was the wide receiver 5 through the first 9 weeks of the season, and then Lamar got hurt and everything. It wasn't really the same without Lamar because, of course, going from Lamar to Tyler Huntley, just a little different. So he did fall off a little bit, but he was the wide receiver 5 for the first 9 weeks of the season. I mean, that's just crazy. Production like that you don't really see too often, and you don't really see too often for someone you can get as your wide receiver 3. He's also playing without Hopkins for the first 6 weeks, meaning his competition right now is Rondale Moore. His competition right now is Zach Ertz and James Conner. These guys mean nothing. AJ Green as well, 34-year-old AJ Green. I forgot to mention him. These guys mean absolutely nothing to Marquise Hollywood Brown. Marquise Hollywood Brown's going to be receiving, at least 10 targets a game without DeAndre Hopkins. And even once DeAndre Hopkins comes back, there is more than enough volume to go around in an offense this big. And if DeAndre Hopkins does end up being the wide receiver 1, that will leave Hollywood in a ton of one-on-one coverage. And if he's the wide receiver 2, it's even better. You got Hollywood Brown as the wide receiver 1 over a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. So either way, you can't go too wrong with taking Marquise Hollywood Brown. There are 2 concerns I have with him, though. One, he drops the ball a ton. Watching Marquise Hollywood Brown drops are painful, and it is painful for fantasy owners to watch that. Seeing a 60-yard touchdown robbed from you because Hollywood has no hands, but everything else as a wide receiver he does well. My only other gripe is that Kyler can be a little inconsistent at times. We've seen it. We've seen it a few times. So that's my only other gripe with him. But other than that, Marquise Hollywood Brown's my wide receiver 11 easily. I really like Hollywood this year. I think he's one of the most slept on guys in the entire draft. But now let's move on to our wide receiver 12 here. My wide receiver 12 for this season is Mike Williams. I really like Mike Williams, especially where it's going on Sleeper this year. On Sleeper, he's currently coming off the board at 51.9 or the wide receiver 19. And on Underdog, he's coming off at 30.7 or the wide receiver 14. So there is a little bit of a disparity. between sleeper and underdog, usually if I am going between these numbers, I do tend to trust underdog a little bit more because these are paid money leagues, whereas sleeper you don't necessarily know, and the ADPs are way more up to date. So that's why I do like Mike Williams a lot here in sleeper. First and foremost, he is attached to Justin Herbert. I mean, come on, what better quarterback could you ask for? There's very, very few guys along 37 touchdowns last year. He's going to be an absolute beast, and he's going to be serving Mike Williams the ball constantly as he did last year. He can explode and absolutely win you a week. I mean, this guy's a deep ball threat, somebody who you figure could easily take the top off a defense and score you 30, a Tyreek Hill caliber type of player in terms of taking the top off a defense. And those performances, they can win you weeks. And sometimes you want to inject a little volatility into your lineups. That's why I think Mike Williams is perfect as a wide receiver 2, where you're getting him on sleeper. You get a very consistent wide receiver 1, let's say like a Justin Jefferson, a Devontae Adams. These guys you know are going to be phenomenal wide receivers. And then you take Mike Williams as your wide receiver 2, perhaps even your wide receiver 3, and you have that weekly volatility. As you could eventually maybe drop 30 points, 40 points in a week, and rely on Justin Jefferson to be that consistent piece in your offense. I also like Mike Williams because I think he has much higher upside than Keenan Allen. That's pretty much what it comes down to in the Keenan Allen versus Mike Williams debate. I think Mike Williams' arrow is pointing up. I think he has so much upside this year. I mean, if he didn't falter in the middle of the season, he could have easily finished as a top 3 wide receiver this year. Whereas Keenan Allen, I don't think has that same type of ceiling, unfortunately, even though I still do like Keenan a lot. And he's going late in sleeper, like I said. He's going behind A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf. I like Mike Williams more than all of these guys by a lot, but you're not getting him at that price point. And then one last pro I have with Mike Williams is the fact that he's playing in the AFC West. I mean, you're going up against the Raiders twice a year. You're going up against the Broncos twice a year, the Chiefs twice a year. All these games are going to be shootouts. So you got to be happy getting Mike Williams here. I would say the only dud I have with Mike Williams is the fact that he can dud. During the midseason last year, we did see him dud pretty heavily, and it did definitely affect fantasy owners. I mean, if you have a guy you're expecting to drop 15 points and he drops 3, it can screw you, so he can lose you weeks, but he can also win you weeks. So take the shot on Mike Williams, I think, where he's going just a little bit before. I think he's a phenomenal wide receiver. But now let's move on to our wide receiver 13 here. The next wide receiver that I have is DJ Moore. I think DJ Moore is an absolutely phenomenal wide receiver playing for the Carolina Panthers right now. On sleeper, he's coming off at an ADP of 45 or the wide receiver 16. On underdog, he's coming off at 33.1 or the wide receiver 15. So I have him a little bit ahead of consensus as the wide receiver 13. Let me get into why. For one, he's playing with the best quarterback of his entire career, which I know sounds really awesome, but when I tell you it's Baker Mayfield, you're going to be a little bit disappointed. But I do think Baker Mayfield's easily the best quarterback of his career. I mean, he's going up against the competition of Darnold, Kyle Allen, and washed Cam Newton. I don't even want to say those names again. It's like choosing between dating your sister, your mom, and your grandma. None are really appetizing choices here. They're all pretty gross. Don't want to think about it. But Baker Mayfield comes in. He can kind of be like a cousin type of role. I'm going to stop with that joke. But he could at least be a little bit better than these past options that DJ Moore's had. So I do think that type of quarterback stability will increase his overall ceiling and increase his overall touchdown volume, which I'll get into in a second for one of his cons. He's absolutely insanely talented. He had 1,100 yards each of the past 3 seasons, despite this absolutely horrendous quarterback play. And he ranked 5.8 in yards after the catch, which ranked him 3rd among all wide receivers last season, despite, again, playing with a washed Cam Newton, Sam Darnold, and not having CMC for half the season to spread the floor. Now you're getting all those things back, a better quarterback situation. The floor should be spread a little bit more. So I think he will be much, much better. And also he's got a 4.2 40 speed. I mean, guy's fast. He can really do it all on the football field. The only problems I have with DJ Moore is, I mean, his quarterback situation is still not good. We're talking about Baker Mayfield here. He's not a guy that you're like, oh, wow, Baker Mayfield. You're not hoping for him as a top 16 quarterback. I think he'll be okay. I think he will be better than people expect, but I don't think he's going to be very, very good. And also, Also, he's kind of had a lack of touchdowns throughout his career. I mean, the past 3 years, he's put up 4 touchdowns. 4 touchdowns. Oh, and 4 touchdowns. We should see some positive regression because Sam Darnold hasn't thrown double-digit touchdowns since 2019. And yes, that's not a typo. It's crazy to me. He's thrown 9 touchdowns and 9 touchdowns over the past 2 years. So, I mean, you should see more touchdowns. When there's 9 touchdowns going around, you're not going to be able to get that many. So he should have more touchdowns going around. If he can get around 7 and 1,200 yards, he will easily exceed this ADP. I think I have him pretty conservative here, especially if McCaffrey does play for a full season. But this is around where he landed for me. I think he could easily be higher. I do like DJ Moore a lot, and I think you should take him. I think he's a really, really talented wide receiver. But now let's move on to our wide receiver 14 here. My wide receiver 14 is a guy I think I could honestly even have higher. I really, really like this guy, and his name is Courtland Sutton. I love Courtland Sutton this year. I mean, for one, on Sleeper, he's coming off an ADP of 52 or the wide receiver 20, which is a steal. On Underdog, he's coming off at 33.6 or the wide receiver 16. So I have him just 1 spot above AD, or 2 spots above his ADP on Underdog. But I really like Courtland Sutton this year. First off, his quarterback situation. I mean, going from Joe Flacco, Drew Lock, Teddy Bridgewater, all these disgusting names, to now Russell Wilson. Russell freaking Wilson. Russell Wilson, absolutely insane quarterback. And Sutton fits the mold that Russell Wilson wants in a wide receiver to an absolute T. I mean, a big body guy, 6'4", check. Touchdown, deep threat, check. Contested catch guy, check. Everything Russell Wilson wants in a wide receiver he's got. So he has that for 1. 2, he's the only wide receiver in this offense between him, Jeudy, and KJ Hamler. I guess I'll throw him in there now. Who's had success at the NFL level, realistically. He had an 1,100-yard season, which is better than Jeudy's ever had. Jeudy has never surpassed 900 yards in a season. And I still think Jeudy is a value where he's going, but I mean, he's never surpassed 900 yards in a season, whereas Sutton has. And he hit that 1,100-yard mark playing with the combination of Drew Lock, Joe Flacco, and Brandon Allen, who combined for 16 touchdowns and 10 interceptions and 212 passing yards a game. You know who that's really, really similar to? Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts last year, 16 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, so 1 less interception, and 209 yards a game. 3 less yards. But the difference is Jalen Hurts can run for 100 yards. These guys, they just suck. They're just terrible quarterbacks at this point in their careers. Joe Flacco, I mean, at one point in his career was nice, but the rest of these guys suck. And Courtland Sutton was still able to have 1,100 yards in this offense, so I think Courtland Sutton is an absolutely phenomenal value, but it gets even better. He's playing in the AFC West, which is a pro for all of these wide receivers who are playing in the AFC West, meaning Broncos twice, Chargers twice, Raiders twice, and Chiefs twice. These games all project to be shootouts. I mean, he's going to be involved in shootout after shootout this year. So that's why I really like Courtland Sutton. The only knock I have on him is that when Jeudy and Sutton were playing last year, Sutton was totally outproduced by Jerry Jeudy. This could just be from terrible quarterback play. I don't want to chalk it up to all quarterback play. I do think Sutton was coming off an ACL tear. Now, year 2 off his ACL tear, he should be much better off to go, but he looked pretty bad last year. I mean, 900 yards in 17 games is not a good stat line. And Jeudy did play fairly okay in those games. Still not great, averaging like 50 yards a game. But Sutton was averaging like 2 targets a game when Jeudy was in the offense. So that's why I am a little bit torn. But Russ will have a top 12 guy. Sutton should honestly be ranked in the top 12. But the only thing is, who is this guy going to be? Whether it is Jeudy or Sutton, I think it's going to be Sutton. But I think Jeudy can easily make a case it should be a 1A, 1B type of wide receiver relationship. So that's where I have Sutton ranked. Let's move on to our wide receiver 15. My wide receiver 15 for this year is none other than Allen Robinson. This is a guy I'm a little scared to have as my wide receiver 15, but nonetheless, let's get into it. For one, on Sleeper, he's coming off the board at 59.2 or the wide receiver 24. On Underdog, he's coming off at exactly pick 40 or the wide receiver 18. Like the last two guys, his quarterbacks have been absolutely horrendous. I mean, this guy's been catching balls from Blake Bortles, Mitch Trubisky, Justin Fields, Andy Dalton, Nick Foles. These quarterbacks are awful. I mean, none of these guys, aside from maybe Justin Fields, have any chops, any hopes to be the starting quarterback. And Justin Fields, 7 touchdowns, 10 interceptions last season. I mean, that's debatably the best quarterback of his career at this point. This guy has had the worst quarterback play I've ever seen. I mean, the worst quarterback luck of all time at the wide receiver position. I don't think it's particularly close. Now, he gets Matt Stafford. In this electric Sean McVay-led Rams offense where his only competition for targets is Cooper Kupp. I mean, that's it. Cam Akers, not really a receiving back. Matt Stafford doesn't check down to his running backs much. Darrell Henderson, same thing. I mean, really, it's just Cooper Kupp. And Cooper Kupp will take away tons and tons of coverage by being the wide receiver 1. He's naturally due for some touchdown regression, having 16 touchdowns last year. Those touchdowns, they have to go somewhere. Some of them will go Allen Robinson's way. Allen Robinson, absolutely one of the most talented wide receivers in the entire league as well. Multiple seasons with 150 plus targets. Guy is an absolutely dominant machine. Over 1,100 yards, 4 seasons. That's absolutely crazy with the quarterbacks he's had throughout his career. Guy's absolute beast this year. He also hasn't hit the age cliff. He's actually 1 year younger than Cooper Kupp, believe it or not. So age isn't really too huge of a concern for me. Around 30 is when it starts to become a concern. He's also been receiving tons of camp buzz. Sean McVay bringing him up night and day, flexing at how they got Allen Robinson at such a discount, which is really funny. And it's the type of wide receiver that Matt Stafford really likes. I mean, that big body contested catch guy. He led the league in contested catches in 2019 and 2020. This guy's an absolute contested catch monster. The only knock you have on Allen Robinson is a fairly obvious knock. I mean, he looked so terrible last season. So terrible, in fact, that you can't just place it on having a terrible coach. You can't just place it on having a terrible quarterback. It was bad. It was really, really bad. But to buy into Allen Robinson at the ADP he's currently going into, you pretty much have to just ignore that last season, chalk it up, and say, okay, listen, we're going to take a deep breath here. We're going to forget about last season. Now he's got the best situation of his career. Hasn't hit an age cliff or anything. Guy should figure to be a beast this year. Maybe he just lost his juice for 1 year. It didn't really look too good. Now this year, he should be back. Now let's move on to my wide receiver 16. My wide receiver 16 this year is Keenan Allen. I really do like Keenan Allen. I thought I would have him higher, but I guess not. I mean, honestly. Currently, he's coming off the board at 31.9 or the wide receiver 11. And on Underdog, he's coming up at 29.4 or the wide receiver 13. So I am a little bit lower on both platforms. For one, Keenan Allen's the consistency king. I mean, he's pretty much a lock to get you 1,100 yards this year, 6 touchdowns, and over 100 receptions. And for PPR, that's absolutely phenomenal. And also, I mean, he's attached to Justin Herbert. He's getting 2 games against the Chargers, or 2 games against the Broncos, 2 games against the Raiders, and 2 games against the Chiefs. These games are all going to be shootouts. Again, saying Keenan Allen will be involved in them. He needs to be. He's an absolute beast. But that's all I have for my pros of Keenan Allen. Going over my cons, I'm honestly a little bit concerned for Keenan Allen this year, and that's why I do have him a tiny bit lower. For one, he's 30 years old, which doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be hitting the age cliff, but it's start to where you have to worry about the age cliff becoming a thing. I mean, I think around 31, 32, you'd be way more concerned. But right now, I mean, it's fair to at least say he's a little bit older of a wide receiver, so the consistency may take a tiny trickle down. Instead of 1,100 yards, he may have closer to 1,000. And also, in his career, he's never had over 8 touchdowns. Last season, even with Justin Herbert slinging 37 TDs, he was the beneficiary of 6. That's really not that much for a guy who's getting touchdowns or getting receptions from Justin Herbert. So I'm a little concerned with the overall touchdown volume with Keenan Allen, and I think age is starting to become a little bit of a factor for him. I still think he is a really, really safe, consistent wide receiver, But I like the upside of these other guys above him more, and that's why I have him so low. I know, don't shoot me. But that's why I do have Keenan Allen so low. I do advise against taking him a little bit, especially as high as he's going. I mean, he's pretty much being drafted near his ceiling. He's not a guy who's going to be finishing top 5, in my opinion, pretty much ever with his lack of touchdowns. So that's why I am off Keenan Allen. But now let's move on to our wide receiver 17. My wide receiver 17 is Jeudy. I like Jeudy this year. I want to like him more. I want to have him higher. I just can't find any space to move him up anymore. Him and Sutton, I mean, I just don't know who for certain is going to be the wide receiver 1. One of these guys will be a top 12 dude, pretty much guaranteed. But it is possible it's Jeudy. It is possible it's Sutton. And I just don't know who it's going to be. Jeudy, though, right now, coming off at 53.2, or the wide receiver 21. On Underdog, he's coming off at 43.3, or also the wide receiver 21. Let's get into the pros. First of all, he outperformed Sutton when Sutton and Jeudy were both healthy last year, totally outsnapping him. I don't think it's huge because, different quarterback situation, everything like that. But it is there. It is worth bringing up at least. He does have a new QB in Russell Wilson, who is much better than the Teddy Bridgewater and the Drew Locks that he's had to deal with in the past. I do think Jeudy will take advantage of that talent at least a little bit, and more than people are saying, I do think it'll be more of a 1A, 1B type of situation than Sutton as the dominant 1 and Jeudy as the dominant 2. Also, there really isn't that much target competition in the way. I mean, you got Sutton, obviously, but then after that, it's KJ Hamler. I mean, this is not a guy you're supremely worried about. With Tim Patrick down on his torn ACL, it's really just them and the running backs, and I mean, at that point, it really is not that big of a deal in terms of his target competition. He also has really, really good draft capital. I mean, when you're going in at pick 15, obviously a team has to really like you. You have to be at least decent at football. So, I mean, the draft capital is definitely there. It's showing that he has talent. Also on the field, I mean, you could just see it. Guy's got talent. And he's also, one last thing, going 10 picks behind Sutton on Underdog. I mean, it's not ridiculously huge to where it's like, okay, that's a massive gap, but it is there. I mean, almost a full round behind him on Underdog is something where if you like Jeudy just as much as Sutton, wait the round and take Jeudy at that point. So that's why I do think Jeudy is going at a little bit more of a value than Sutton, but it does make sense why Sutton is going over him, and I do have Sutton higher because of that. But the cons for Jeudy are also a little bit worse. For one, he's never produced at an NFL level. I mean, he's never had over 900 yards in a season. Granted, some of that should come down to quarterback play, but you can't blame all of that on quarterback play. So there is a little bit of concerns with Jeudy for that. And he's not the type of wide receiver that Russ has utilized in the past. Maybe it's because he hasn't had that talented of wide receiver in this type of role in the past. But it is at least worth noting, in my opinion, and why I do have Jeudy a bit lower than Sutton here. I still think both these guys are great, and they are in the same tier, just separated by a few players. I do just think Sutton's going to be a little bit better this upcoming season. But now, let's move on to my wide receiver 18. My wide receiver 18 going into this season is Jaylen Waddle. Jaylen Waddle's sleeper ADP right now is 46.1, or the wide receiver 17. His underdog ADP is 37.4, also the wide receiver 17. Let's get into the basics. Jaylen Waddle last season was an absolute beast for a rookie, putting up over 100 receptions for the first time in a rookie's career, on 140 targets and over 1,000 yards. I mean, guy's clearly a beast. He went right behind Jamar Chase in the draft last year at number 6, so clearly he's a pretty talented guy. An absolute phenomenal wide receiver, can separate like that, absolutely crazy. Jaylen Waddle's floor is absolutely insane. I mean, if you're getting 100 receptions in a half PPR type of format, which is how I'm doing these grades, that's actually ridiculous considering he can go up from that number. I mean, he easily could. But the problems are most certainly there. For one, Tyreek Hill coming into the offense is a tiny bit scary for overall volume for both of these guys. I think both of these guys separate are absolutely insane, but these guys together bring down their overall ceilings just enough to where I have to rank them around or just lower than consensus personally, but I do think both of these guys could pop off. So that's one of my concerns. And my other concerns is that Tua is not really a special quarterback. I mean, he's never proven it fully at the NFL level. I think with this supporting cast, it's really hard for him not to prove it. But he hasn't done so yet. That's why I am a tiny bit concerned. But Jaylen Waddle could easily finish as the wide receiver 1 over Tyreek Hill in this offense. I'm not saying it's likely. I'm not saying it's going to happen. But, I mean, I would give it a 60% chance Tyreek Hill finishes the wide receiver 1. A 40% chance Jaylen Waddle finishes the wide receiver 1. And I think that's why I like Jaylen Waddle at his ADP a little bit more than Tyreek Hill personally, especially on Sleeper. Even though they are going at the same point, Jaylen Waddle feels a little bit more tolerable on Sleeper. Tyreek Hill does not feel tolerable on Sleeper at all. I mean, he's going off the board as like the wide receiver 7 or something like that. You can't take him there. I mean, that's just absolutely ridiculous. Going from Pat Mahomes to Tua, you can't do that. So that's why I'm personally a little bit lower on Jaylen Waddle. I still think he's going to be a fine wide receiver, but I am a little bit concerned with his overall volume that he's going to be getting next year. But anyways, let's move on to our wide receiver 19. My wide receiver 19 is Juju Smith-Schuster. Juju Smith-Schuster right now on Sleeper is coming off the board as the wide receiver 30 at pick 74. And on Underdog, he's coming off as the wide receiver 24 or pick 48, pick 48.6 to be exact. First of all, Juju's got the Pat Mahomes factor. I mean, going from a guy like the corpse of Big Ben to Pat Mahomes, slight upgrade there. just a slight upgrade. So that's first. I mean, Pat Mahomes, enough said. 2, he's done it before. I mean, this guy had 1,400 yards in a season. Sure, granted, it feels like a long time ago because it was his age 22 season. Now he's 25. So it is a little bit scary. But Juju has done it before, proven he can do it at the NFL level. 3, the competition really isn't too bad. I mean, it's more than on a team like, let's say, the Rams. But I mean, it's him, Kelsey. Marquez Valdes-Scantling doesn't really concern me too much. I mean, he's not going to take snaps away from Juju Smith-Schuster. They're not the same roles or anything. One's a deep ball guy. One's a slot wide receiver. Sky Moore is really the only concern, I think, for slot snaps to be taken away from Juju. But he still can play on the outside, and they signed Juju before they brought in Sky Moore. So I think Juju's more of the short-term guy. Sky Moore might be more of the long-term answer, but Sky Moore can also play outside. So I really like Juju this year. He also finished as the wide receiver 19 2 years ago, despite playing with the corpse of Big Ben. I mean, Big Ben looked awful 2 years ago. Looked even worse last year, but he was still the wide receiver 19, which isn't that bad. The only cons are, I mean, he missed all of last season with the shoulder surgery, only able to play 5 games, and he did look terrible in those 5 games. I'm not going to lie to you. But at least it's not a torn ACL, so I think it won't impinge his play this year nearly as much. And my second con is that he is in a 1-year prove-it deal, which is a little bit scary. I mean, 1 year, $10 million. They're showing that they kind of want him, but like prove-it deals are always a little bit scary to me because the NFL is skeptical. I think he'll bounce back. That's why I have him as my wide receiver at 19 here. But it is possible he does bust. I mean, he is coming off. I do have him ahead of both Sleeper and Underdog here. So I do have him above his ADP, but he's done it before. We shall see if he does it again. But I do have some pretty high confidence in Juju Smith-Schuster this year. Now, let's move on to our wide receiver 20. My wide receiver 20, is Diontae Johnson, a guy that has a lot of difference in ADP based on what platform you're drafting on. On Sleeper, he's coming off as the wide receiver 13, coming off the board at 40.9. And on Underdog, he's coming off at 47.9. Or the wide receiver 23. I have him somewhere in the middle. Right now he's my wide receiver 20. So I do have him closer to his Underdog rankings. But I think Sleeper is fairly justified with where they have him as well. I can really see an argument for both sides. For one, last year's an absolute target hog. I mean, this guy's a PPR machine. He got the second most targets in the entire league last year at 170. So this guy's getting targets. He's an elite route runner, elite separator. Yeah, can get the ball in the first second of a play and take it for 15, 20 yards. Absolute electric player to watch. Very, very fun. He did get re-signed for 2 years, which is pretty interesting to see. I mean, Steelers clearly showing they have at least some faith in him. They don't generally re-sign their wide receivers, but this year they were feeling a little more generous, a little bit different. He is in a division with some potential for shootouts, and you got the Ravens, who look to be a pretty good team. You've got the Browns, who once they get Deshaun Watson back should at least be an okay team. And then obviously the Bengals are going to be insane this year. So their division looks really, really pretty strong overall. So they will get in some high-scoring games, which will benefit Diontae Johnson. I do think there are some cons to his profile that not that many people are talking about. Yeah, for one, I don't think drops are a huge concern, but I'll at least mention them here. And my other main concern is that even though I think Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett will most likely be better than Ben Roethlisberger, they might be better and still go in a different direction. Because Ben Roethlisberger, I mean, this guy did not want to get hit for anything, and he couldn't move out of the pocket, so he had to get the ball out quick. That's why he's got 100 targets to Najee, 170 to Diontae Johnson, because these are the guys who can get open quickly. Chase Claypool, his routes take time to develop. Diontae Johnson's don't. That's why he was throwing it to Diontae Johnson so much, or at least one of the reasons. I mean, Diontae Johnson, also a very talented wide receiver, don't get me wrong. I love Diontae Johnson, but that's the main reason why he was checking it down to Diontae Johnson so much. Trubisky and Pickett might not do that, to be 100% honest. I mean, I think they probably will do something like that. He still definitely will have over like 140, 150 targets, but 170, I mean, that's really a ton to eclipse. And then also, his teammates are pretty decent. I mean, you expect Najee to be involved in the passing game. Chase Claypool should get more work this year. Pickens should get some work. And then you got Freiermuth stepping into year 2. So it is a tiny bit concerning to see just how many mouths they have to feed. And that's why I have Diontae Johnson as my wide receiver 20. I think he is a little undervalued on Underdog, but on Sleeper, I mean, I think he's being massively overvalued where he's going right now. But anyways, guys, that's about it from me. I hope you guys did enjoy. Please go down, leave a comment below. Let me know exactly what you think of this wide receiver rankings. Am I too high? Am I too low on somebody? And let me know your top 20 down below. Subscribe to the channel so you can absolutely dominate your league mates. Leave a like on this video. Would mean the world to me. Thank you guys so much again for watching. I really hope you guys have a great day, have a great night, and have a great life.